Namaste and welcome to this exciting new episode of Sattology, Debunking Mythology. Sat means truth, Logos means the study of science, Sattology means science of truth or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means the science of fake lie imagination or study of fake lie imagination. In this show today, we always talk about strategic affairs, global affairs, and most of you love it. I call it the bitter truth sessions. So without delay, let us welcome my friend and an analyst and researcher, Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Hello, Abhijit.
Hello.
Abhijit, when we look at the condition of natives in the world, and I don't know why I'm going to the natives, but because a lot of noises are being made for human rights of aborigines, Maoris, natives in North America, and natives in South America. But we have not seen any concrete action since the beginning of these countries, founding of these countries, including Canada. Why is so much politics about Native Americans or natives, but there is not being done by any government, whether it's a Canada, New Zealand, or Australia or USA? And the only place where we see something is being done to protect their culture is India. Tribal, the ministries of tribal, at least we have. What do you have to say on that?
So see, it's slightly different that way because what had happened was in Australia or Canada or America, much of the native culture was already wiped out. So what's being preserved right now is, some kind of a rump remnant, uh, which really has no connection back to what it was once upon a time, except maybe fragmentary here and there. In India, the thing is, you've had Aboriginal cultures that have been flourishing for the last 30, 40,000 years, which have remained undisturbed in spite of later population migrations, invasions, and all of that. Like, for example, you can go into the Deccan Plateau and still find tribes completely isolated, where as isolated as can be. Or you go to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and you find them completely isolated. They probably migrated there 40, 50,000 years back. Uh, uh, they're still Stone Age tribes. They will still kill you on contact. Uh, I think the closest that you'd come to that is somewhere in the deep forests of Papua New Guinea, even though even there contact has been made. So the only people trying to disrupt that so far have been Christian missionaries who, if you remember last year or last year, a Christian missionary was killed trying to get into the Sentinel Islands because he wanted them to, hear the message of Christ or whatever it is. And there are laws. There are laws to protect their land. There are laws to protect them from outside contact. Now, given that we're a third world country, sometimes it doesn't work. Very frequently, what you see in peninsular India is that there is completely rapine mining of their areas because those are all mineral-rich areas. And the mining mafia is extremely strong. I mean, even this government doesn't do anything to stop the mining mafias. Remember, a lot of the funds of this government used to come from the mining mafia, and according to some people, they still do. So I wouldn't say India's record's been particularly exemplary, but the starting point, let's just say, has been different, as in restorative from a cultural genocide to never having had that cultural genocide. You're seeing some kind of a cultural genocide in progress, but where it's highlighted, it stops.
If you look at the definition of natives itself, or indigenous people or aborigines, is generally people who have been living off the land and they have never been converted either in mindset or culture or art or behavior. And you see that none of that being promoted in any European country also. There were no European Romani people, which Sushma Swaraj was the first Indian minister to 2016. She pointed them out. There are Zoroastrians in Iran, which are practically wiped out. Their language is spoken but not celebrated or taught
Mm.
in any schools. Same is the thing with Latoka tribes and other tribes of aborigines, Ujbe tribes in USA. Many tribes are there in the USA. None of the languages are promoted to be spoken in any sphere of life. You is there a fear of these Western countries that these people may demand a nation back if they're educated?
No, I don't think they've ever had that kind of large scale scope or cultural resilience or anything like that. It's been a case of, they just need to be. You can't, in the name of civilizing them or giving them modern benefits, forcibly take something to them. If they want, they're free to come out of the forests and seek out what they want. It's wreaked havoc, incidentally. If you look at the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, because missionaries wanted to go there and convert, they've turned a large section of the Jarvas into alcoholics and organized thug gangs that come and stop and plunder tourist buses going here and there, which should have never happened in the first place, but it has. So, these are things that, being a third world country with, and the definition of a third world country, one of the definitions for third world country is an enforcement deficit. So you can't even enforce the laws that you have, which are actually quite strict. So it continues, but no, it's never been one of demanding a separate state or country or whatever. Because remember, in India, we have a linguistic division of states. If we were so paranoid about people demanding their own independence, then you wouldn't have had a linguistic division in the first place.
India has done a remarkable job in protecting these cultures, and it came out of the United Nations report also, where they appreciated India for promoting and protecting the languages of indigenous people, but not in the case of any other nation which I just mentioned: Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand. Now, I see in the government circles, this government of Biden made some policy statements for the natives. And they said Native Americans, and many of them are watching today, and that's why I'm asking these questions. So they made policy statements and they also made some work, but no budgets were allocated. Most of the world does not know that US has two presidents. One is the president of the First Nations, and another is the president of the United States Constitution. So constitutionally, there is a president elected nationally, and there is another president which is elected by the reservations, and which controls the affairs of the reservations. And there is such a little budget allocated that majority of the 5 million people who live in the reservations, or probably less now, much lesser now, they do not have a say on getting electricity to them, getting water, getting highways, or even education centers dedicated to them. It's not possible at all. In India, yes, you compared it's a deficit, enforcement deficit state, and I really like the term. But in the case of US and Canada and Australia, and they have no shortage of enforcement. It's all about the enforcement countries. Why do you think that is there, and why the politicians also are playing lip service also?
Well, I won't really know about these relations in America because it's not something that I've studied. But in India, it's very much a case of an enforcement deficit. And the sad fact that they occupy extremely mineral rich land. I mean, if they weren't in mineral rich land, nobody would really care. Because through most of the agricultural period, the lands where they live, because of past migrations, they've been pushed into all the sort of inhospitable areas. Not that they were farmers anyway. They were always hunter-gatherers. They've always led a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. They still lead a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. They don't farm. They're still very much stuck in a lifestyle that's about 10, 12,000 years old. Never progressed beyond that. If you look at the Onjes and the Jarvas and the Sentinelese in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, they've even lost the ability to craft stone tools, right? They just rely on sharpening wood and things like that. So I really couldn't comment on what's happening in America because simply I just don't know enough.
Coming back to these strategic affairs, like when we talk about the why the opposition to China is globally fading off now. People have forgotten about Wuhan virus and just moving on with the life. And USA is a big proponent of just normalizing relations with China. Why that is a movement now? It is becoming a movement. So whatever the world can do, China has done or China will do, nobody cares about it. People know that they are investing in Navy in a big time, and some of the products are really good coming out, and their advancement in UAVs has been unmanned aerial vehicles and marine vehicles also. It has been phenomenal. Why the world is trying to normalize everything with China?
Look, I wouldn't say it's phenomenon. Remember, there's uh, uh, a sort of narrative that you see outside the public narrative in America, and there's the private narrative in America. The private narrative in America is very, very different, where they really don't care too much about uh, Chinese advances because they're kinetic advances. They are not uh, sort of those deep technology advances. You look at the hypersonic missile, for example. In its first test, it landed about 2-3 kilometers away from where it was meant to land. Now, what is the point of something like that doesn't have pinpoint accuracy unless you fit a nuclear warhead onto it? And if you fit a nuclear warhead onto it, I mean, you might as well just have used your ballistic missile. The terminal guidance of those hypersonic things is highly questionable. So you look at, say, MG, the former British company, Morris Garage's MG Motors. You have these Chinese cars coming into India. They're popular at a lower end segment of the market, but most people won't touch it with a barge pole. Anybody who's even remotely brand conscious won't touch it with a barge pole. The only people who actually touch it are the ones who aren't brand conscious, who are looking for a good deal. And that is the reason why China has such a huge trade balance surplus with India, is because India is an extremely price sensitive market. The moment you become brand conscious as opposed to price conscious, nobody wants to touch Chinese products with a barge pole.
Now, if you look at the ongoing Ukraine-Russia crisis, which is gradually ramping up, everybody is making statements, and the Ukrainian armies are opposite again, or strengthening against one section of Russian border, not the whole. And the Russians are also increasing the pressure. The whole opposition is that the NATO should not put anti-air defense missiles. How far do you think this conflict will go, and what is the reason behind this conflict?
So I don't know why there seems to be confusion in America, because the Russians have made it crystal clear that any NATO deployment in Ukraine is a red line that they're not going to tolerate, and they will invade. They've said this openly. They've said this publicly. I can show you video recordings where the Russian ambassador to Delhi came to my former think tank ORF and said it out loud. He said, if you put in missiles in Ukraine, if you send troops into Ukraine, we will invade. That is an absolute red line. Now, I don't understand why these people don't get it. It's one thing pretending not to get it. But remember, technically, as per legality, preemptive war is legal, preventive war is illegal. All right. Preemptive is where you know action is imminent and you act first in order to forestall it. Preventive is when you know action is imminent somewhere down the line and you act to prevent it from even getting to that point. Now, the American invasion of Iraq blurred those lines. It was essentially, they claimed it was preemptive war, when in fact it was preventive war. So the legality of this has been opened up by American actions in the invasion of Iraq. So, America really has no ground to stand. If you're talking about humanitarian intervention to protect a minority, what America did in Kosovo, to protect the Kosovar Muslim minority, that is the same thing. You invaded a sovereign state, and that was a NATO operation. Why would Russia not do the same with regards to ethnic Russians around Ukraine? Because remember, Ukraine as we know it today isn't old Ukraine. A lot of parts of Russia, the Donbass, were essentially gifted over to Ukraine under Khrushchev, who himself was Ukrainian. So Russia has, you can oppose Russia if the 2001 invasion of Iraq hadn't happened and the Kosovo so-called humanitarian intervention hadn't happened. Once that has happened, there's no grounds to deny Russia cause, because Russia will ultimately do what it wants. It's that simple. And remember, Ukraine is not a treaty ally. I don't know why people are going on giving Ukraine false hope. Because remember, if Russia does indeed invade Ukraine, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, sorry. So if Russia does indeed invade Ukraine, who exactly? I mean, America doesn't have a treaty to protect Ukraine. None of the NATO allies have a treaty to protect Ukraine. NATO even, I can tell you honestly, what I'm hearing in private, the French and the Germans are very, very clear. The Italians, the Spanish, they're all very clear that they're not going to allow any kind of military intervention in support of Ukraine. So I don't know why some people sitting in DC are giving Ukraine this false impression that they will do something to protect it.
That is a sort of American, I think, maybe the Cold War world era, 91, the strength of US. And I think it's, so you very well put it, preemptive versus preventive. Now, what stops India, which has a very live belligerence on the borders, to act like Russia? What stops India to take a
It's very
preemptive?
simple. Why should we? Because remember, what Russia is doing in Ukraine is what Pakistan did in Kashmir. You invoke ethnic or ethno-religious reasons to invade and annex a state. Now, the West, when this happened to India, when Pakistan invaded Kashmir and seized about a third of it, the West didn't impose sanctions on Pakistan. So India's entire thing is, and they continue to remain in control of 1/3 of that state. So India's current contention is, if you don't want to condemn or impose sanctions on Pakistan for invading a state called Kashmir on ethno-religious reasons, why the hell should India join you in condemning Russia for invading Ukraine and doing the same thing Pakistan did? It can't be one rule book for Pakistan and another rule book for Russia. This is number one. Number two, so it's pure Schadenfreude at one level. The second is this entire thing that we need Russia to counterbalance China. See, we're a continental power. We're not an offshore balancer, a naval power like Britain, the role that Britain or America have traditionally played, that their own land area has always been secure. So they use their fleets to project power outside. India's never been like that. We've always been a land power, a continental power, and we share a border with China. So even if America feels that it doesn't care if China and Russia come together, that is India's nightmare scenario for Russia and China to come together. India is never going to allow that. So it's also partially divide and rule to see to it that there's enough leverage. India has enough levers in Moscow to prevent Russia and China from coming together.
It's very heartening to hear that. In US, I can tell you, a lot of my friend circle, the moment we say Russia is all negative emotions. And when the moment we say India, all positive emotions. Maybe they're not. Maybe India has a soft power in the US also. So what do you think? It's a general thing. Like, except the think tanks of Washington, everyone has a good opinion about India and the Indians. What can be the reason for that?
Well, except the American press as well. The American press and the American think tanks have a bad opinion of India. I really don't place much store on American goodwill for India. Just like, for example, I don't place much store on this hostility for Russia either. Because if you look at the American right, a lot of Trumpists were open and out Russia admirers, right? That the way they protect their culture, the way they protect their borders, etc., etc., etc. This is a game where the narrative will be shaped based on who uh, America decides is the enemy and who America decides is not the enemy. Okay. Russia was very much one of those things where America played its fair share, more than its fair share, in destroying that relationship. Okay. Be it, the duplicitous guarantees that were given to Russia during the Syria invasion, the way Kosovo was carried out, the way the Bosnian intervention was carried out, etc., etc., etc. The way Iraq happened, all of that has been one of those things where America went on screwing up, thinking it was paramount. There would be no pushback. This is the American century. We're going to recreate the world in our own image, whatever. Now, congratulations to you. But where I'm sitting right now, the way American thought and speech are policed, the way you have public pogroms, not pogroms. What's the correct word? What were those Chinese things? Those re-education camps and self-criticisms and public shaming and whatnot. How is America today any different from Mao Zedong's China? What you're seeing, the woke pansy revolution in America, is the same as the cultural revolution in China. It's no different. So, even this sort of cultural, this thing narrative, it doesn't work for me. So, again, America likes or dislikes Russia, I don't give a shit. America likes or dislikes India, again, I don't give a shit. Because guess what? American opinions really, I don't give a shit for American opinions. And America is kind of irrelevant in India anyway.
For many of the Jewish friends we have, happy Hanukkah to all of you, and belated though, because it has already passed, but thank you all for joining. Now, one of the things which comes into the play is even the Israel Foreign Office doesn't trust Americans in a large way. They keep on rejecting many of the statements coming out of Democrats party and the Democrats who supported the BDS movement in Israel, which was also anti-Zionist movement, and which is still is very strong. Bernie Sanders is a big supporter, but the American government is not able to act on it because of Israeli pressure. I mean, what sort of pressure do Israel apply on Americans so that they can thwart off this kind of adventurism by the new State Department? What do you say?
Look, there's a lot of pressure that Israel can't thwart, right? For example, the way America blatantly interferes in Israeli elections. Netanyahu has openly accused America of interfering in this whole thing when Naftali Bennett came to power right now. This is the first time, mind you. Clinton also interfered in elections previously, and Netanyahu tried to interfere in US elections. And that's that famous meeting between Netanyahu and Clinton when they were completely frosty to each other. So there's generally been a deal. And remember, during Obama's time, the mutual trust became so bad that the Americans were spying. They literally took over. They could get, the camera feed of Israeli drones and things like that. They tried to spy on Netanyahu's office. So that's a very, very different relationship. The thing is, that a lot of Jews in America tend to be Democrat supporters, and essentially are on the same side as Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and people like that. The problem is there is some extremities that Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar would go to that is a line too far for the Democrats, and it's that sort of Jewish funding power of candidates out there that would keep a lot of this in check. Plus the fact that they act in a very, very smart way. IPAC or would do a fantastic job in lobbying senators and things like that, in reminding them of their interests and launching political campaigns and things like that in a very, very thought out and careful way. The Indian diaspora is a joke. They really don't know how to do all these things. Okay. And that doesn't matter because, the Indian diaspora, unlike the Jewish diaspora that has a connection to the homeland, the Indian diaspora are a bunch of jokers because, their connection to Indian homeland is only this, they see it as this kind of pious, beautiful place where nothing goes wrong on the one hand. And on the other, they're these chimpanzees that want to assimilate completely with what they perceive to be a superior culture. So between the two, which is the worst of the right and the absolute trash of the left, that's what you get in America mostly, 99.99% of the time. There's nothing you can do about it. It is what it is. Because, largely, about 95 to 97% of Indian Americans are the types back in India, you really won't be calling into your drawing room or chilling out with them, So that's perfectly fine. That's how the Indian American community is, and good for them. I'm just glad that they're not in India anymore, right? I'm just glad that they've left. Good riddance. But there's a fundamental difference of approach. There's a fundamental difference of the diaspora. There's a fundamental difference of the interdependence between the two countries. There's a fundamental difference of how each of those relationships perceive their own interests.
So you brought it out so accurately, the parallels between the Indian American community, and both of them, I feel it's a Stockholm syndrome, which is working also, of fear, which they've seen in the past.
It's not fear. It's not fear. It's not fear. It's an acute inferiority complex that plagues every Indian. Indians are fantastic at acting against their own self-interest. You've seen that in India as well. I mean, every election, you always vote for the biggest farter. You never vote for the doer, you vote for the farter. Every election, Modi, Nehru, Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, they've all been the biggest bunch of farters. The two people who actually did something, they lost elections. One was P.V. Narasimha Rao, the other was Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and they both lost the elections very badly. In order to win an Indian election, you should do nothing except sit on your fat ass, and you need to eat a lot of lentils or anything that produces flatulence and fart copious quantities. So rajma chawal, dal chawal, things that lead to, kidney beans and rice, and what Texans would call chili and rice, and all those lentils that produce huge quantities of gaseous emission. There's a reason we're a country of lentil eaters, because we fart copiously.
Now, coming back to the East, now I have no words.
To the extent we shouldn't call ourselves Hindustan, we should call ourselves Fartistan.
Now, going back to the extreme, the east of China. Now the conflicts are brewing between Russia, Japan, and China and Japan. Russia and Japan over some islands, and China and Japan over some islands also. And also the Vietnam has been enforcing their navy to work against China. Do you think that all these nations which have lost South China Sea completely right now because of the naval dominance of China, most of it is lost, do you think they will ever be able to contend with China, or they will have to force a war on China to claim their own rights?
So I don't think it's lost at all. China is building islands. It's claiming All of this is its territory. Nobody else accepts it. Vietnam certainly doesn't accept it. Japan doesn't accept it. And the rest of the countries piggyback on America. So I don't think this is going to go China's way, because China knows it just needs to start off hostilities with one country for everything to come crashing down. And given Xi Jinping, the way he's eliminated, remember, look, I mean, in any situation, you may not like your opposition, whether internal or external, but they function as an important check and balance. Right now, Xi Jinping has absolutely no checks and balances, and so the bad decisions tend to compound. So, for example, during the Second World War, because there were checks and balances within the fascist party, a group of fascists, the king could order the arrest of Mussolini and order his execution. In Germany, there were no checks and balances, so nobody could order the arrest of Hitler and his execution. Right? Now, what happens here is from being something like fascist Italy, where there were checks and balances, Xi Jinping has turned China into Nazi Germany, where there are no checks and balances in terms of government structure. Not in, I mean, there are concentration camps, but heck, Italy also had concentration camps. You know, they invented the modern concentration camp was an Italian invention in Libya. Though the Boer War saw it, the final template of what became what our knowledge of a concentration camp is, with barbed wires and things like that, is very much an Italian invention. But anyway, that's a sidebar. So with China, the mistakes keep compounding. He just needs to do one thing, maybe a clash for reunification of Taiwan, and that's the end of the story for China in the South China Sea, because that's going to militarize. Right now, it's a quasi-militarized conflict, kind of like a coldish, let's say a tepid war. When the situation gets hot, there's literally going to be no chip standing for China.
You know, that's exactly what I also see. Actually, most of the people are aware that if China begins the first action or tries to do that on Taiwan, it will be a ripple effect on other parts of the Chinese claims also. And also we feel that most of the, this is just a feeling, but I'm just asking you, do you think that India will ever join in that kind of war? Because India has the habit of not choosing the right opportunities sometimes.
You know, India was best explained by what the Israeli Foreign Minister Abba Eban used to say about the Arabs. And Abba Eban used to say the Palestinians never lose an opportunity to lose an opportunity. And that pretty much describes India. India never loses an opportunity to lose an opportunity. I guess that's good. The problem is you can't win big, but then you also don't lose big. It is what it is.
Now, coming back to the India, since you're talking about India, the farm laws, and we see a lot of ruckus in the parliament. The farm laws have been repealed, and the opposition is now kind of in India. The opposition is kind of sort of divided now on farm bills. So, do you think that was a good strategy by Modi to win?
It was a terrible strategy. For the sake of Punjab, he threw all the other Indian farmers under the truck. And, you know, it's not good at all. The man has set back the entire reform process by something like 30, 40 years. Indian agriculture is never going to get reformed now for a very, very long time. And there's nothing we can do about it. That's the truly sad part of this. But, you know, it is what it is, and the man will do what he does. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it.
Is it the same colossal mistake like the Shah Bano case of Rajiv Gandhi? What happened there is as bad?
It is. That's exactly what it is.
Now, coming back to India, in India, we see a lot of companies in India now exporting. And also there is a big amount of poverty being sold by the American press to the Americans. India is a very, very poor nation. And just as statistics came out for 2019 and 2019 for India, America has 11.7% of the population, which is cannot afford two meals. Only one meal they can afford, 11.7%. And Indian population is also 11.7%, which cannot afford a single meal. So most of the poverty is selling, like most of the times when you uh, talk to an American and the American policymaker, they're under the impression that 50% of India is poor. But if you look at the streets of San Francisco, Los Angeles, and even some other cities in the US, they are today unrecognizable as you would imagine in Hollywood movies. What do you have to say on that?
I think the quality of poverty in India is altogether different from what you see in America, right? The kind of absolute poverty that you would see here, you're simply not going to see in America. Uh, there would always be a way out in terms of social security or whatever for an American to go do what they do. In India, you don't have a social security net. You don't have a Medicare net. You would have literally nowhere where a person would go to die. So America is still way ahead. I think this sort of comparison in competitive poverty porn, it suits nobody's purpose. That said, I think it's also equally important to realize that America, if it continues down this path of CRT and so-called social justice bullshit, they're going to get to the Indian thing very soon.
Social security net in USA is diminishing, and it is only applicable to those who actually add to the social security net. So more than 60% Americans don't have social security, 60%. And the Medicare is like a permanent, like once you use the Medicare facility and you paid and you're not allocated for that, then you have to pay double the price of what is the market prices are. So people become the slaves of the system. So it is a very, people do not understand who are outside of US, the social security and Medicare in the US are already defunct. They have no money left now. So, and the people who have actually paid for last 30 years through their taxes, social security, they're not going to get anything back also. So it's like you deposit in your bank balance, like just like 401k. Now in India, I mean, even though you do not have the social security net or anything else, but there are systems and processes where everyone can afford a meal, like just what the Indian government did recently. Like this, they sent almost like 30 to 40 billion dollars worth of grains free during the COVID times to poor people. We don't have that facility here. I think that there is a comparison which is becoming equal now between India and the US, and the celebrating poverty or selling poverty of India to the mainstream media in the US is, I think, is largely unfounded based on the latest numbers which has come out. What do you have to say on that?
Sorry, you didn't get the question.
The question is
What's
that
the question?
the question is celebrating poverty in the, like the what they do is that they sell poverty in the India to just to put down the Indian efforts and other things. It goes on media a lot of times. Like for example, Barkha Datta.
Look, I don't really give a shit because look, India is not picking itself up from. If India's landed in shit, it's ultimately India's responsibility to pick itself up from the shit. America isn't going to industrialize us. Britain isn't going to industrialize us. France and Germany are not going to industrialize us. Russia and China sure as hell aren't going to industrialize us. So if we're happy to wallow in our own shit, why should we complain that some enterprising Indians are going and profiting off poverty porn in the American press? I think we should be celebrating Rana Ayub and Barkhadat and people like that, because at least somebody is interested in taking themselves out of poverty, even if Indians as a whole aren't.
Good point. Good perspective, actually. The last point, which in this discussion we're going to do, is that the position of Australia vis-a-vis China. So Chinese, they export a lot of products to Australia, and Australia exports a lot of iron minerals and other minerals to China. Do you think that that relationship thwarts Quad to work exactly against Chinese interests?
It doesn't thwart Quad. Look, it's a balancing game, right? It's always been very complicated, that comes from several different angles, and you can play this absolutely anyway. If somebody tells me that ABC is sort of undermining the Quad, I can also show you the same ABC method where it strengthens the Quad, right? So, not really, no.
Thank you, Abhijit, for your time. I think it has been a wonderful, and we covered a lot of issues which are highlighted by our students to get an Indian perspective. Now, I can tell you some of the very prominent student union leaders are also here. So, thank you, Abhijit, for coming on the show and sharing with us your insights. Namaste.
Thank you. Great talking to you guys. Ciao.
Bye.